Welcome back to our afternoon session, which is dealing with our internal world. And we will begin now with Pravrajika Sevaprana's talk.
So my topic is the problem of the ego. Who am I? If we ask ourselves this question, we come up with according to our own viewpoint of ourselves. We may say, I'm a man or a woman, American or Indian, tall, short, blonde, brunette, young, old. All descriptions of this body. Or we may say, I'm a nun, a nurse, a teacher, a cook, a doctor, a lawyer, a rich man, a mother. In this transactional Vyavarika reality, I feel identified with the body and with the mind, and therefore I call myself an individual being. When I'm called by a certain name, I respond to it. When a certain description is given, I recognize myself. This is our mistake. How, when a certain description is given, do I recognize myself? How do I get into a state of identification with these various personas, with this body-mind complex, and even with the outer things, the work we do or the people that we know? The ego, its I-ness, ahamkara, is one of the 24 cosmic principles. This ego tends to act most in the manas, where the I has to make choices. When the mind has a desire, or it chooses what it wants, there the ego functions. This sense of I is constantly identifying itself with outside things. Egotism strives on the recognition of it survives on the recognition of other people with whom we can compare ourselves. The I never stands alone. It is always associated with the buddhi, the manas, or the chitta. If the I is the subject, it is always accompanied by the sense of doing. That's what ahamkara means. Except during deep sleep. In deep sleep, it remains in a state. What is this I? This I is not one thing at all. To say that it is a function of the mind is only a partial truth. It's made up of two things: chit, consciousness, and jada, the unconscious principle. Chit is the light of the true self, which is perfect. It's the light of all that shines. What is presented by the intelligence is the unconscious, the insentient aspect of our ego, and the two together give us this egotistic sense. The pure ego, which is a reflection of the pure self, becomes associated with the doer, and the two together become the ego. The phenomenal existence is jada, or unconscious, insentient. The light of the pure self, the chit, falls on it, and the ego is, as it were, produced. The ego has been called chid jada granti, the knot that is made up of two strands, one pure consciousness and the other the material phenomena. The two are bound together, and then we have this sense without any verb attached. That I would no longer be ego. It would be the pure self, the self-conscious being. Ahamkara means that, the doing self. We think we're doing all this. This is the heart that we are seeking to cut asunder. Likens the search for the sense of I to peeling an onion. If you look within and slowly peel off the layers of an onion, what you are identifying with, there may be a lot of tears, but in the end, you find that there's no reality, no separate sense of I's at all. There's nothing in the center of that onion. In the end, the sense of I vanishes, and there's only Satchidananda, the one reality, which is one with the Atman. Ramana Maharshi says, the quest, who am I, is the axe with which to cut off the ego. The first and foremost thought that arises in the mind is the I thought. Seek to find it. Know who you are. Then all else will be known to you. So keep going inward. Who is thinking? Who is seeing? Who am I? According to Vedantic philosophy, the true self of man is the nature of divinity. It's perfect, eternal, and infinite. Yet we find ourselves, through the influence of Maya, illusion, or ignorance, identified with so many things. We have first the causal, subtle, almost perfect state of mind, or buddhi, very pure. Sri Ramakrishna actually says, pure buddhi is Brahman. This is pure intelligence, deep hidden in the lotus of the heart, as the Upanishads tell us. This is the first causal manifestation of mind, and it's followed by other states of mind, the vital force and the senses. These things are not altogether subjective in a person. They also are instrumental, and they're therefore partially objective. But they're so mixed up with our identification with ourselves that we call them subjective. But if we meditate on them deeply, we will find that they too are a degeneration of our true state. We are identified more or less with our bodies and minds, and we live as though this is the reality. In fact, in Western thought, that which can be measured and experienced by the senses, the most gross of a manifestation, is what we mean when we say real or reality. In Eastern thought, this isn't true. Reality is the eternal, the true, Satchidananda, which can never be defined or expressed even in words. Sri Ramakrishna tells us ignorance lasts as long as one has an ego. There can be no liberation as long as the ego remains. O God, thou art the only doer, not I. That is knowledge. When a man merges himself in God, then he can no longer retain that ego. He keeps only the ego of knowledge, the devotee ego, the servant ego. His wicked ego disappears. In a rare few, God completely effaces the ego, and these go beyond good and evil. Even after God has been realized, he keeps in the mind of the devotee this thought, if he so desires, the feeling of the servant ego. The company of holy men, repeating the name of God, and unceasing prayer. The man who has seen God retains his eye only in name. It's a mere appearance, like a mark on a coconut tree where the branch has fallen off. Only the mark remains. There's no reason why the soul should not know itself as it is, pure and perfect. Yet the soul does not have that knowledge. We have somehow evolved with matter and mind, and we think that we are these things. The I sense has identified itself with things outside. What is the individual soul, the Jivatman? The soul in its own nature, spirit, is perfect. But for some reason it's become associated with this mind and this body, and this association of the soul with mind and body presupposes a certain weakness or lack in the soul. But how can the soul, which is pure and perfect, have any weakness? This is called avidya, or maya, ignorance. Not just lack of knowledge, but rather having a mistaken idea about what is reality. But wait, the mind is in consciousness. Consciousness, or Chaitanya, is its own proof. It is the proof of everything else. Consciousness is truly self-existent. It is beyond any condition. It's imperishable, eternal, and when it is realized as such, a person finds that it is its own proof, just as the sun does not need any help or any light to show itself. Its own light reveals it. By his light, all this is lighted. Within the world of matter, there are or seem to be an infinite number of little islands that seem to be individual, and yet they're not completely separate. Little individual consciousnesses, as it were. My own individuality is dependent on the prevalence of certain conditions outside of me, and any change of the objective universe would bring about a corresponding change in my perception of myself. My life seems to be functioning for my own individual purposes, yet it is not completely independent from the objective universe. It depends on it also. The individual is, as it were, the subject, and the universe the object. We tend to try to explain everything in terms of the objective universe as a process within the external world. However, this is one-sided. It can also be looked at from a subjective viewpoint, that we have in fact projected everything outside of us. This separation in individual souls is only an apparent reality, but beyond this is the universal soul, which appears to become evolved as mind, and yet Swamiji tells us that this soul of man, because it is separate from the mind and body, is really immortal. It has existed through eternity. It never dies. When the body dies, the vital force of a man goes back to his mind, and his mind becomes dissolved in the prana, and that prana enters into the soul of a man, and the soul of the man comes out again, clothed in the subtle body and mental body or spiritual body. And in this body lie the samskaras of the man, his character. Everything that we've thought, every action we've done is lodged in the mind in a fine form, in the chitta. And when we die, the sum total of all these impressions makes us a fine body as a medium, and the jiva takes a new body according to these fine impressions in the mind. In his lecture, The Real and Apparent Man, Swamiji tells us that there is but one Atman, eternally pure, eternally perfect, unchangeable, and all these various changes in the universe are but appearances in the one self. Upon it, name and form have painted these dreams. It is this Maya that creates the individuals and makes one appear different from another. We see these bodies and minds as different in quality and form. Clothed in time, space, and causation, the manifold universe appears in the ocean of the infinite. In the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, Ramakrishna gives us the example of a sun shining down on many pots of water and being reflected in each one. The ego may be likened to that pot with the sun reflected in it. He asks, when all the pots are broken, what remains? And Girish, intelligent man that he was, says, the sun remains. Ramakrishna says, no, only that which is remains. What is. Aham Brahmasmi. So here we are, the eternal spirit, the conscious being, here in this body, which is a living object. The mind is both conscious and yet identified with the body. Our ego sense, our intelligence, our mind, even the senses, all seem to be part of ourselves. We appear to be part of this gross universe. It appears that I'm a body, and then I believe that this is all there is. Yet there is in me a higher being, my effulgent self, and my yet higher self, the absolute immutable one, the Atman or Brahman. If my sense of I-ness shifts and becomes identified with my effulgent self, or with my omniscient self, or with my absolute self, at once my whole universe will change. It's possible to wake up, as it were. Our real nature is complete, full, purna, and perfect. No one needs anything from outside. Sometimes it is said that the soul, when it is experienced enough, awakens from all illusions, and the necessity for experience is over, and therefore the stream of life and death come to an end. Ramakrishna says, make the ego ripe. Through spiritual discipline, live in the world with a ripened ego, the servant ego, or the ego of knowledge. It doesn't injure anyone. Say, I am the servant of God. This will free you, not bind you. If I want to live up to this truth, then not only will my perception and my behavior and my expectations be based on that fact that everyone is divine reality, but I must also know that I myself am that reality too. I must always live in the consciousness of it. I must not be conscious of anything else. I say, all this verily is Brahman. Sarvam kalidam Brahma. The world appears real because behind this fantasy forms, there is the existence of God. Life has meaning because behind all this life, there is the presence of divinity. Know everything to be God, and everything will be fulfilled. For out of that knowledge comes infinite love, infinite peace, infinite joy, infinite kindness and compassion, and infinite service. I am that being, consciousness, bliss absolute. Aham Brahmasmi. This is your real self, and this is one with all. Thank you.
Next, Pravrajika Krishnaprana will discuss dealing with the emotions.
Just a sec. Okay, I would like to start with a story that took place in the 1200s in Japan. In the time of the shogunate, a samurai warrior was in the employ of the shogun, and his job was to go out and, of course, get rid of the shogun's enemies. Now, he was sent out to kill a certain warlord. He got there, he had the battle, they fought furiously for most of the day, and he was all ready to deliver the final blow. And he put down his sword and walked off. And everyone was just like, what happened? And he said, I got angry, so I could not do that. It was no longer a service to the shogun. It was a personal attack. This is what is meant by emotions. This samurai had been taught to be the master of his emotions, not to be dragged about by and led by them. Emotions are things. We all have them, and they make life very, very interesting. They're like the spice of life. And we should not give up emotions or squash our emotions. But we should, or ideally, if we want to be happy and content, we must learn to control our emotions, not be slaves led around by them. Emotions are not inherently disturbing. They are only a thought in a moment of time. And when we stop and think about that, I mean, you know, you experience certain things and anger rises up. Now how can you say that's just a thought in a moment of time? Well, that is, the anger becomes our master when we fixate on our desire or expectation. It's the fixation that causes the disturbance of our whole being. The fixation on the event in a moment of time. And if we eliminate, or try to eliminate, work on eliminating the reasons that we fixate on this event that happens in time. I mean, okay, you're driving down the street and some car cuts you off. Now that's an event in a moment of time. If we become attached to the fact that, what right did he have to cut me off? I mean, I'm in a hurry too, and we have fixated on that event. And who have we disturbed? Whose peace have we disturbed by fixation? Only ourselves. We have not really touched the cause of our fixation because we're looking outside. Mostly when we're reading the Hindu scriptures, we tend to enumerate the negative emotions: lust, anger, greed, envy. Because no one's really troubled by the happy emotions. I mean, what's the problem? But according to some of the scriptures, I can't remember who said this, hyper-emotive people are more concerned with their own distress. They're not concerned with what they're seeing or the suffering of others. They're concerned about how these things are affecting them. This is most of our emotions or go back to attachment, fixation, and ego. When we become hyper-emotional or start reacting to events, it's because our ego is bruised. Our expectation is not met. Our attachment to whatever a desired end, we feel we're thwarted. So our immediate reaction is to give vent to that emotion, rather than look at the emotion and say, why am I getting this upset? Or why do I feel envy in this situation? In order to control our emotions, and emotions can be, they can, when you see someone who, when we see, okay, I'm going to give a really bad example. January 6th in the White House, all of those people that were storming, right? But I'm not good on dates or time. When they're storming, they were so emotionally out of control. And you could see it when you watched the film. They had no idea what they were doing. Completely and absolutely out of any kind of mental control. We call it crowd mentality, but it's basically simply not evaluating. the event and what the consequences. Looking at an event that is happening and saying, what is it that's really happening? Now, in my estimation, Americans don't do that. We don't storm our except in the throes of the position. So how do we control emotions? Okay, according to Ricard, he said there's 3 ways we can do it. We can supply an anecdote, an opposite. He states that there are definitely mental states, emotions, that are completely incompatible. Pride and humility, envy and joy, generosity and avarice, calm and agitation. No ambivalence between these pairs is possible. Can you feel pride and humility at the same moment? No. Can you feel total generosity and at the same time avarice? They're incompatible. With introspection, we will be able to distinguish between the emotions that enhance the joy in our lives and the ones that diminish it. And as soon as we distinguish between those emotions, we have choices. And the choices we can make. So, you're feeling angry at someone, but take a minute or two and go, what am I really angry about? Is it an action they did hurt my ego? Did they say something that makes me want to protect myself, my little self? Passions will last as long as the body lasts. So in order to have a certain amount of contentment and peace, we must learn to deal with them, learn to identify them, and learn to counteract them. Another way, Ricard says, is through liberation. Through another thought in time. So we feeling angry, but we kind of let that anger go for a little while and say, what is it? Usually, if you look at something, especially a mental thought or anything, as Swami used to say, the little wanderings that go on when you first sit down to meditate and you think of everything else. Just watch them, and they get tired and they calm down. Same with emotions. If you look at them and analyze what's going on. The third way to deal with emotions, and this one, as Ricard said, is very, very tricky and dangerous, is to use them to instigate. It is, if you feel anger, now in Vedanta we would say, then direct that anger towards God. Ricard doesn't quite go that far. He says, sublimate it, do not repress it. Use it for inner change, but watch it, but do not fixate on it. However, the danger is that when you start to try to use anger to overcome anger, it's very, very tricky, and you can become more and more fixated on it. So, like in Vedanta, they say Bhakti Yoga is the easiest course for this period of time. Anecdotes raising up an opposite thought. Liberation from the thought. Look at it and say, it's my attachment here, it's my ego. I can let go of it. Now, Swami Turiyananda said, Shivananda, passion is that which centers around oneself. Love is that which centers around God. Never pride yourself on your having gained control of your passions. If you do, they will at once raise their heads again. And Swami Vijnanananda said, God is both inside and outside you. When you realize that He is within you, your passions will be under control. Because if it is God that dwells in you, then how can you have these attachments and this egocentric expression of the passions? And Swami Vedananda says it very abruptly. Man is a slave to his passion, which is the same as desires, and desires are associated with selfishness. Okay? Any kind of desire we have, except the desire for God. And even that has a tiny bit of selfishness in it because we want God for ourselves. Now that grows and expands, that's not a bad one, but any desires that we have within the world, in the external world, are usually for our self-gratification or the gratification of our family or our country or whatever. But yeah, I did. This was, so the ways we can do it in today's world. This is the sequence. If we don't allow the negative emotions to increase, say anger, you get angry, and everyone does. Now, and you release it because it's supposedly very good to release these things and then you will get over them. According to Vedanta, if you release it, you deepen the samskara. And releasing it gives it more credence. So pretty soon you develop a habit of bad-temperedness. And with bad-temperedness comes chronic suffering. Physical suffering decreases when we control anger and control it without repression. Control it by analyzing it and sublimating it, but not by repressing it. Stuffing it down does not get rid of it. Releasing it does not get rid of it. Looking at it and analyzing it will help you get rid of it. That's anger, that's lust, that's envy, that's almost all of the emotions. So, now, we'll end with one of Vijnananda's sayings. I say, he only is free who has gained mastery over his passions, and one who is slave to them is bound in chains. We don't want to be bound in chains and led by our negative emotions. Okay?
Now, Pravrajika Vrajaprana will discuss dealing with the uncontrolled mind.
So the Katha Upanishad gives a very famous illustration of the soul's journey through life with either an uncontrolled mind or a controlled mind. Know the soul sitting in the chariot as the master of the chariot. Know the body as the chariot. Know the intelligence as the charioteer, and the mind as the reins in the hand of the charioteer. The senses are the horses, and the roads the horses travel on are the sense objects. Wise people, discriminating people, call this soul, this master of the chariot, sitting in the chariot, an enjoyer when it is united with the body, senses, and mind. One who is always of unrestrained mind, and devoid of right understanding, such a one's senses becomes uncontrollable, like the willful horses of the charioteer. But one who is always of restrained mind and has right understanding, such a one's senses are controllable, like the good horses of a charioteer. This soul of restrained mind and right understanding reaches his goal, reaches spiritual realization, reaches the end of samsara, this cycle of endless births and deaths. But this other one, devoid of understanding and of unrestrained mind, just continues in rounds of births and deaths. So, we're being called masters of our chariots, sitting in our chariots, and going along the roads of our world of sense experience. We're called enjoyers if we unite ourselves with body, mind, and senses. The Upanishad doesn't say it's wrong to be an enjoyer. If we have right understanding and a restrained mind, we reach our spiritual goal. If we're devoid of right understanding and have an unrestrained mind, we remain caught in this round of births and deaths. So there's a way to enjoy that catches us and binds us, and there's a way to enjoy that frees us. And the key is our understanding, the charioteer, our intelligence. We are the conscious soul, and intelligence is our guiding force. Intelligence is the very finest, subtle matter of mind. It's transparent. It's like a mirror, a two-way mirror. One side, it mirrors the world of mind matter and the world of physical matter. And on the other side, it mirrors consciousness, the light of God, the light of our spiritual self. This side of intelligence is the inner side, the right understanding side. It gives us unity, wholeness, fullness, depth. It reveals for us the unity underlying this world of infinite difference, infinite variety. It is the pure reflection of God in our hearts. In dynamic terms, this side of intelligence is an immensely powerful energy of stillness, of clear focus. The outer side of intelligence reflects the mental, physical energy of this outgoing mind and its incessant contacts with the world of the senses. So the Upanishad is saying that when we, as the rider in the chariot, the master of the chariot, chooses to unite ourselves with body, mind, and senses, we become an enjoyer. Enjoyer of what? what the body, mind, and senses bring to us. And it's telling us, be smart, have right understanding and a controlled mind. If we want to enjoy the world in a small, selfish way, a greedy way, then intelligence reflects for us all the endless fragments of the senses. Why call them fragments? Because we don't go to the depth of anything through the wrong use of the senses. The mind becomes outgoing, just races along the roads, and we catch fleeting glimpses of what we are passing. There is an inner side to the senses and an outer side. There is an inner side to the mind and an outer side. There is an inner side to sense objects and an outer side. Swami Brahmananda said, tell me the line of demarcation between matter and spirit. He knew what he was talking about. But for us, it's a profound meditation. How can a fragmented side, how can a fragmented side, just a minute, I'm reading the wrong thing here. Sorry, just a second here. How can a fragmented intelligence reflecting all sense fragments of our mind, how can such an intelligence have focus of power to rein in an outgoing mind? So there's another way to enjoy the world, and this is our spiritual practice. We truly enjoy when we detach ourselves from running outward like wild horses. That wildness controls us. We are the conscious soul, but in ordinary life we have stuck ourselves to the outgoing mind, identified ourselves with the outgoing mind, and we think that is the way to enjoy ourselves, fulfill ourselves, by contacting and grabbing the things of the senses. Why call them things of the senses? Because it's the surface of the senses. This grabbing creates more and more desire for outside things. Our outgoing mind stretches its reins tightly towards the horses. We are forcing the charioteer to go along with this rat race, and he has lost the power to guide us, to take us to our goal. Intelligent power lies in unity, in wholeness. We are seeking to find this wholeness behind all the passing bits of experience. Unity is the way to enjoy. We need to harness the mind inward towards this unity, towards God. The mind has to go from being scattered to being one-pointed. The scattered mind pulls away from clear, whole, intelligent light, and we are not able to enjoy anything in its depth, to become absorbed in anything. This deep absorption is the true way of fulfilling ourselves. The Isha Upanishad says it very simply: we truly enjoy by renouncing the passing world of things. How renouncing? By covering all things with God. We don't snuff them out. We just handle them with God, with clear, intelligent light. Then they become more than just things. They become sacred. We don't want to grab at them with this scattered mind. We thought this was the way to enjoy. We find it is not. We turn away from this kind of outer enjoying to inner enjoying. What really gives us fulfillment in our lives are all the moments of forgetting this little grabbing self, in absorbing our attention, our awareness fully in anything or anyone. This is love. This is the essence. We are the rider in the chariot, the master of the chariot, and what happens if we don't wrongly unite with body, mind, and senses? What happens if we renounce the idea of enjoying selfishly through these? We become detached. Just sitting quietly within, not rushing to grab the reins. We don't need to. Our charioteer, the light of God in our heart, is holding the reins, guiding the horses in just the right way, in one pointed light, in full undistracted power of will. We are masters when we are not under the control of anything outside ourselves. This is not just controlling ourselves from wanting too many cookies or being overly dependent on smartphones or tablets. It means not being controlled by our thoughts, our likes and dislikes, all our omniscient opinions, because these are really outside ourselves also. So detach from our thoughts, japa. Detach from all our mental merry-go-rounds and attach ourselves to the spiritual light and power of our mantra. Detach from actions, all their fruits, good and bad, offer them to God, etc., etc., in the practices of detachment. It can go on and on. The body, mind, and senses are our instruments for dealing with the world. When we attach ourselves, when we identify ourselves through selfish desire with our instruments, we get stuck to them. You can picture a carpenter hammering, and he reaches in his toolbox for a drill, and the hammer has become welded to his hand. And he can't let it go. Can't let the hammer go. So the perfect example of this detachment in action is Holy Mother. She could handle all the details of her complicated, crazy household because her intelligence was detached, dispassionate. Because of her detachment, she could concentrate on any problem clearly without becoming stuck there. She was absorbed in God. Well, that's Holy Mother. For us, it's a long, long struggle. Arjuna tells Krishna, this mind is just about impossible to control, like the wind. And Krishna agrees. But then he says, but it can be done with practice and detachment. With these two weapons, the goal is reached.
And finally, Pravrajika Vrajaprana will wrap up our session with living in the present.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for staying here and staying awake so far. So this is our concluding talk, and the good news is it'll probably be about half as long as the other scholarly sisters. So this morning we have heard from our panel about the external world and our relationship in various ways with society and the family and the environment. And this afternoon, we're now dealing with the internal world. And we've heard about the uncontrolled mind, which we're all pretty familiar with. and the ego, and also emotions. So this subject, living in the present, is slightly different. And I think we really understand what living in the present means when we have met someone who actually lives in the present. You know, our spiritual teachers in general, they all urge us to slow down, slow way down. Our minds are in constant state of intense vibration, and we're constantly moving mentally and also physically. So the first thing our teachers tell us is slow down. Slow down. We have to learn to live in the present moment. I mean, when you think about it, the present moment is the only thing that continually presents itself to us. It's the only thing that we really have control of. The past, our past experiences, they're memories that are etched in our neuronal network. And the future is simply our own anticipation of what might happen or what we wish might happen. But both of these, the past and the future, we remember or we recall in the present. So if we think about what has happened in the past, we do it in the present. If we think about what we might want to do on our vacation or what we're going to do tomorrow, we also do that in the present. We only live in the present moment. That's all that's available to us. However, practically speaking, we spend a great deal of our time living in the past and in the future. How often do we forget the precious moment that's right before us? Days go by in utter self-forgetfulness. And we often overlook those in our lives, our friends, our family members, our co-workers, our fellow devotees. We forget. And oftentimes, those that we really love and admire, we fail to remember them until it is often, unfortunately, too late. And even when we have leisure time ourselves, free or leisure time, how often do we actually take stock of what is happening within ourselves and outside of ourselves? And as a result of this kind of mental movement, the end result is that we actually live on the very surface of our being, which is vast and infinite. But it is not available to us at present because we aren't present to recognize it. Whatever has happened to us, any of us in the past, we cannot change it. We cannot reverse it. We cannot undo it. We can't change it. It's done. It's finished. We can mull over the past. We can brood over it. We can rejoice in it. We can anticipate the future and its possibilities. So if the past and the future are so tenuous, how do we actually live in the present? Is it really possible to live in the present moment and live a fully active life, whether it's within a family or a spiritual community or just on our own? So we have to pause and ask ourselves the question, is there any possibility other than living in the present? Being in the present moment, in the here and now, simply basically means being aware of what is happening at this very moment. And I dare say probably if we went around the room and asked everyone what they were thinking about, possibly some would say yes, they are focused in the present moment. But the next moment, your mind will be thinking about what you're cooking for supper or where you're going after you leave here, or like this. This is how our minds go. They're in a constant, continual motion. All of our attention has to be focused now, in the here and now. This is what our teachers say that we need to practice. I mean, we have to admit, it's good to think about the past and the future sometimes. I mean, where would we be if we didn't look at the past, at our successes and our mistakes, and learn from them? Or if we didn't anticipate the future, speculate about what possibly could happen to us? We have to deal with the past and the future in our pragmatic daily lives. Psychologically speaking, we learn from our past experiences. And we also need to plan for the future. We have to figure out what it is we want to do with our life, and then how we're going to go about accomplishing that. Now, for spiritual seekers, all of which we are here, the basic practice of reflection, in Sanskrit manana, is a huge help to spiritual seekers. When we practice reflection, we become more aware of the contents of our thoughts, our mental habits, our ambitions, our opinions, our prejudices, what we like, what we don't like. Most of the time, these things, it's just a jumble. We go through life and we never stop to analyze those things. When we practice reflection, these things become more obvious to us, and we're able to step aside and see exactly what our minds are doing. That's the very first step in remaining in the present moment. I mean, most of our thinking, no matter how sophisticated, no matter how educated we are, it's highly mechanical and repetitive. That's the bottom line, because that's the nature of the mind. It's mechanical. And we can even get quite creative in avoiding the present moment. Life is often boring and monotonous. No matter how challenging our jobs may be, or how challenging our relationships with others may be, we get bored and things become monotonous. We may wish to be anywhere, anytime, other than where we are. But unfortunately, where we are is where we've always been. So nevertheless, in spite of this, we habitually filter all of our experiences through thick overlays of plans and hopes and internal dialogues. And sometimes we go through the entire day, and at the end of the day, we wonder where it went. And then the next day, we do it all over again. And this is how we live our life. And there's always something coming up in our lives that we have to anticipate, something that we need to prepare for. And our lives are so well documented on social media that it's never been easier to get lost in the past. So given the fast pace and the hectic schedules that many of us have to keep, a feeling of uneasiness is sort of the new norm. We may not give it that term, but if we look within ourselves, we will find that we're off center. We may not even realize it, but this tendency to pull us to the past and into the future leaves us perpetually feeling scattered and out of touch with ourselves, and for very good reason. But here, the good news is that we can learn to listen to our thoughts without involvement in them. And that's a very big step. By trying to learn to live in the present, we can train ourselves slowly to see reality as it is, instead of through our own screen of thoughts and concepts. It's our own minds that project and prevent us from perceiving what is there. Now, the cure for this condition, according to many of our spiritual masters and what they've been saying all along, is be aware, be conscious, be mindful. I mean, after all, we are that infinite being. We've heard this from a number of the sisters today in their presentation. We're eternally present. That is the nature of our being. And that is what we're all striving to reach, is this ever-present, undying, undecaying, immortal being, which is our true self. So by practicing, trying to be in touch with our true self, we are attempting really, basically, to remain in the present. It goes together. Living in the present may be a solution to a problem that we didn't even realize that we had. So to free ourselves from the mechanical existence, we have to think deeply. We have to reflect and think deeply. And this deep thinking is often what leads many of us to spiritual life, because we can't find answers in the ordinary world. And one of the initial basic principles of spiritual life is accepting life as it is. We are so accustomed to projecting what we wish to see and resisting what we don't want to see that we fail to see what's simply there. So to accept life basically means we have to accept all the pairs of opposites. Life means death. It's two ends of the same spectrum. If you have joy, you have to expect to have sorrow. If you have gain, eventually you're going to have loss. And all of our problems in life arise because we try to push against the negative, and we only want to accept what we call positive. But the fact is, there's something within all of us, deep within all of us, under all circumstances, that never changes, that's always the same. And that unchanging being or principle of our ground of our existence is ever present. It simply has to be uncovered. We can't say, well, we do spiritual practices and we attain it, because it's already ours. We can never lose it. We have just simply forgotten it because our minds are so caught up in the past and in the future, neither of which are relevant to us at this moment. What matters, basically, is the present and the present alone. Now, living in the present doesn't mean that we withdraw from all of our worldly responsibilities or our responsibilities in a spiritual community, and we sit for hours together on our meditation cushions staring at the tip of our nose. That's not what remaining in the present means. Remaining in the present means that we have a broader vision of life. Virajaprana touched on this in her introductory talk. Life is an integrated whole, and we are part of that integrated whole. We have to be inwardly aware of that. And every day when we struggle, through our meditation, through our prayers, whatever, to remain in the present in front of our chosen deity, whatever he, she, or it happens to be, we are basically trying to remain in the present and to keep our minds in that present moment. We're trying to come in touch with who we really are. When we are aware of the present, we don't need to worry about getting caught up in the thoughts of our past or anxiety about our future. We can revisit the past. We can anticipate the future without losing ourselves. That's the point. We need to learn to live consciously, to put things in proper perspective. And in this way, we become more and more aware of our life experiences. And we can say, many of the Buddhists put it in this way, it's attentive listening, it's mindful seeing. We hear these terms a lot. But there's a lot of meaning in them. So for a spiritual seeker, to summarize, for a spiritual seeker, through whatever spiritual practice we take up, whether it's meditation, whether it's worship, whether it's scriptural study, it doesn't matter what our practice is. What we need to look at is, why are we practicing what we're practicing? What is our aim goal here? And all of us are trying to expand our consciousness, to lift up into the realm of our spiritual dimension. So through these practices, we slowly train our minds. We slowly bring this uncontrolled mind under our control. It's a long process. It's not something that's achieved overnight. So through the constant practice of remaining aware of the moment, remaining mindful of the conditions and the people around us, the scattered mind slowly comes under our control. And when it gradually comes under our control, we will find we're able to work in a calm, more detached spirit while simultaneously remaining in the present. It's all a question of how our mental energy is spent and directed. I mean, actually, the bottom line of what everyone's talking about here is experiential. It's avan manasagochara. It's beyond speech and mind. But at the pragmatic, everyday level, this is all we have to work with. We have to work with our bodies and minds and make them fit instruments to reach a higher state of consciousness. So when we settle into the present moment, we can learn to see the beauties of nature, external and internal, that are right before our eyes. And this practice is actually quite simple when we can let go of our running commentary on life and simply practice existing, practice being. Then slowly, our practices will begin to reveal our true nature, here and now. There is no other time for knowing ourselves except for the present moment. Thank you.
So now we're going to have a short break, and we went a little bit over, so maybe we could come back at 2:50 for questions and answers. Give everybody a little time to get a drink.
you know. And so it's that feeling that I am the one doing everything, you know. But the thing is that actually there's a wonderful Bengali song that says, Shakali tomar icha mai, kara to me. And that means, oh Mother, everything is done by your sweet will. Man only thinks that he's the doer. He says, I am the doer. But actually, you are doing. And Sri Ramakrishna often in the gospel, he'll say this, I'm the instrument, you know, and God is the doer. So there, he gives these different ideas of the kind of ego that you can have that still is a good, what he calls a good ego, which is the one that knows that it's the servant or it's the child of the divine, and it's still acting, or they say the ego of knowledge, where you understand that all this is the divine play, you know, and you're really not the doer. It's God who's doing everything. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says the gunas on the gunas, they're working. Everything is working like a wheel mounted on a machine. It's all working. We're really the instrument. And we have to get in tune with that fact instead of being egotistical about it, in the sense that because I have this desire, I want this. And that's the unripe ego. So he says you have to ripen that sense of I-ness so that you understand that is really done by divine will, everything in this universe.
Any other questions? You want to come up to the microphone, Ron?
Thank you. This will be a general question to anybody that wants to take it. So I'm confused on one aspect of, they call it reincarnation, or first, in the objective reality, there's no really good or evil. It's just an expression of phenomena, or it's the expression of consciousness. Then if we apply subjective reality to it, 5 senses, then we're hooked into that it's me that's doing it. It's a misidentification. But that's the name of the game. The name of the game is misidentification down here. Gestation, you're an infant, and it takes how many years in order for you to even be able to feed yourself? We don't remember underneath lower than 5, 6 years old. We don't even know that we're sleeping when we are, or dreaming. We don't know the difference. But this is the game that we have to play down here. So I don't understand the part where we pay the price. We've done wrong. Because I could see everybody here, we're all good people. We're not going to do anything wrong. But yet, when we have this misidentification and then we try to exert our ego, or we think that there's something to achieve out there, we'll be painful doing it, that there's actually going to be karma, or that we're going to have to pay the price, we're going to have to take a reincarnation to it. Who's the one that has to pay the price? If we are the soul that comes in here perfectly, who's the one that pays? So that's my question.
I think this is for the Northern Kingdom.
There is such a thing as good actions and evil actions. And every person has a choice to do them. That which causes suffering, pain, is a bad, evil action, and that which brings good, which serves others, which is unselfish, which is kind, which is pure, which is motiveless goodness, is a good action. Our mind, from birth to birth to birth to birth, takes on all the impressions of our many, many bad births, both our good actions and our good thoughts, and our bad actions and our bad thoughts. And those come to us in this life or in future lives as experiences of pain or experiences of pleasure, one or the other. All of them are from our own past actions and past thoughts. How we deal with them in this life determines what our future will be. Do we react with anger, hatred, bitterness, blaming others? Do we react with love, kindness, generosity, service? That determines our future as well. There is no one up there that's going, you are going to suffer for that. We are suffering the consequences or enjoying the bliss of our own previous thoughts and actions.
But who is doing it if you are ultimately, this is the question, right? If you are ultimately the Atman, then who is having this journey? The answer is nobody. This is an illusion. And that while we have, the Yoga Sutra says that our illusions are determined by our attachments, our aversions, and our fears. We go to Tiffany's, we look at the jewelry and we enjoy it, no problem. We go to Tiffany's and we come home and think, I have to have that bracelet, I have to have that bracelet. This leaves an impression on the mind. Now, ultimately, there is no mind. But we have to talk in the terms of the Vyavaharika, the relative, which is what we're experiencing, and our level of consciousness, which is where we are doing our spiritual sadhana from at this level. Ultimately, the Advaitists would say, no, there is no you, there is no karma, there is no birth, there is no death. But in the realm of Vyavaharika, which where we are, then just as when we're in a dream and we wake up, we know, oh, that was unreal. But while we're in the dream, it may seem to be very real. I am not a great Shankara Advaitist, so I'm going to retire at this point, but that's the best as I understand it. Pass it on to the Northern Californians who are much more Advaitic than me.
Did you ever see the movie The Matrix? Too bad. It is really the best thing out there, artistically speaking, that tackles this problem of living in an illusion. And admittedly, there are some things in there, like there's a lot of violence and this and that, which you come to understand later is part of the growth of knowledge of the main character. He has to go through these things. But anyway, so yes, who is experiencing this? The one. The one and only is experiencing all of it. And somehow or other, we think that we are uniquely participating in it, but we're not uniquely participating in it. We're part of that one dreamer's dream, if you want to say. There's one philosophy that's just called Eka Jiva. There's only one being. And we're all sort of splinters or droplets or sparks or mist or whatever you want to call it, sharing in a portion of the ability of that one to experience And I think that's, without going directly to scripture, that's about the best thing that I can think of right at the moment.
No, I'll speak more from the idea of the jiva, the embodied soul, which we are. And we have certain samskaras that have come to us through our many different births. And that is what they say, we're reaping the results of that. That's prarabdha karma. They talk about 3 kinds of karma, and it's like a bow and arrow. And you have one that is already in the air, that's prarabdha karma, that's what you're getting this time. You have one that's in the bow, and you can still get rid of the one that's in the bow, you can put it down. And there's some that are in the quiver, and you can burn those can be burned. So the one that's in the air, you really can't do too much about that, although Holy Mother says spiritual practice will lessen the result even of that. But the results of karma, and that's what is made out of. And that's what we have to work on. We work on our spiritual life in order to build up our character. And Sri Ramakrishna gives the example of a thorn. You've been stuck with a thorn that's sticking in you, and you pick up another thorn and you dig it out. And then you throw both thorns away. So until you're really liberated, you can't get beyond good and evil. You know, you have to use the good to get rid of the evil. You know, you throw both away. Then you become free, and then you won't have to come back. That's what they say. You'll be jiva mukta.
Well, this one's going to sound extremely simplified. I think I heard who's behind this, and if I didn't hear that,
If we're all Atman,
if we're all,
what is being reborn with karma?
And who suffers? The one who suffers.
but we only suffer as long as we identify with where we are right now. If we change that identification to identification with the divine, there's no suffering. Because as Ramakrishna said, this whole world becomes a mansion of mirth. As long as we do not identify with our situation, the things that are happening to us, yes, they're happening to us. Yes, we have to live through them. Yes, we have to deal with them. But if we do not have attachment to it, or we do not have identification with it, then actually I don't know, that's the way I feel.
Saint Teresa also said, it's not possible for me to suffer anymore because everything to me comes from God, and I love everything that God gives to me.
We don't have to wait for nirvikalpa samadhi to enjoy the bliss of God. If you put your mind in God every single day, as much as you can, and you look outside, you look at everything that happens, and say thank you, then what's not to like? I mean, I really feel that way.
It's on. It's on. You just have to be closer.
To some extent, it's a question of standpoint. And what I mean by standpoint is, for example, Shankara's guru, Gaudapada, referring to, there's no creation, there's nothing. Shankara then introduced Vyavaharika Satya, which means a practical, pragmatic reality. So from the standpoint of a jiva, which you are, which we all are, we have to reality, that's an entirely different standpoint. So sometimes in our discussions, if we mix standpoints, then we come into confusion. So my understanding is there's the Paramatman, there is the Jivatman. Simply stated, the Jivatman is the embodied soul who has a karmic load. And when that karmic load is spent through spiritual tapas, he becomes one with the Paramatman.
There's another perspective on this, and that is, well, there's always another perspective in Hinduism. It's as if the Divine Mother as if we're in a play, and the Divine Mother has assumed all the roles. Just as the actor enjoys being a beggar or a king or these kind of things. Ultimately, we're the instruments in the divine play of the Mother. And so what happens to us, how it happens, is her sweet will.
And that's that.
Okay. Well, we're coming up to our end time, which was listed as 3:15 on the original program. So we have our closing statement from... Was there one more question? Okay. Well, then you need to take this one back.
Virajaprana, in your topic, you covered the essence of living in the present as more of being aware.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
The essence of living in the present is actually being aware as the main practice is
To be
being be aware, be aware of the current moment.
To live in the moment is actually to be aware.
Yes.
Yeah.
The ultimate state is the ultimate state is exactly that,
Yeah.
of being aware.
So the question I have is the awareness itself. We progress in spiritual life, the meaning and the conception of it changes. Is initial, at least as a spiritual aspirant trying to practice spiritual practices, initially you think of seeing God in yourself and others as a way of trying to be in the moment. Can you elaborate more on when you see, let's say, Swami Brahmananda is always lost, but at the same time you also see them seeing all the details sometimes when they're interacting with people, and also at the same time there are moments where they're not even aware of what's going on. So can you elaborate a little bit more on awareness and whether its conception changes over time?
Okay, so my understanding is when our spiritual teachers talk about being conscious, and when they speak about awareness, speaking about a state that is natural to us. So it's not that you can say, yes, the thinking mind, you can sharpen your awareness, you can sharpen your perceptions. This is not a mental state. The awareness and the consciousness that the spiritual teachers are talking about is a living. Of course, we have to use our minds to reach that. So the awareness it just is. It's our movements of our mind that various ways. And as we practice sadhana, presumably, the mind quiets down. In proportion to the mind's quieting down, natural awareness, the consciousness that's already within us, quiets up. So it's not a matter that we get a new awareness or that we get something different. We're in that. At this very moment, we're perceiving that. We're just not, we're not fully conscious of it, that's all. It's like Swami Vivekananda says, open your eyes and see him. So what does he mean by that? It's what he says. Open your eyes and see him. It's right before you. That's my understanding. Anybody else have?
The only thing I would say is that there is a difference between the consciousness, again, we're in these different levels, but there's a difference when we talk about the consciousness of awareness and pure consciousness. And so sometimes we talk about consciousness as if, pure consciousness is the same as the consciousness that we experience when we are fully conscious, fully aware, and fully present. Okay.
So are there any more questions before we wrap it up? Okay, then we will have a closing statement from Pravrajika Vrajaprana.
Well, first and foremost, thank you. Thank you. It has been such an enjoyable. It's really wonderful having you here. Bless you, all you stalwarts, both present and online. It's been really so much fun. We've had so many different viewpoints looking at it, and it's been extraordinarily practical. It's so nice to have these tools where we can really apply our to our daily life. Today is 9/11, and this is a day which for the past 20 years has been our national mourning tragedy. But I'd like to remind you that in 9/11, 1893, is when Swami Vivekananda stood on the stage in Chicago and said, "Sisters and brothers, America." That he brought Vedanta to this country. And when I see a group like this today, I'm thinking, excuse me, Swamiji, you did it. You did it. Look at this. How fantastic that this work has spread. Such a here than to see a panel of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Western women with pride and happiness. In 1895, he opened the gates of that big barn by giving sannyasa to Marie Louise, who Abhayananda. Her monastic life was short-lived, but it didn't matter because once the toothpaste was out of that tube, it was all over. The news reached the New York Herald, and the Herald talked about this woman who had these weird Hindu rituals and became a Hindu Swami. And of course, the news hit India, and poor Alasena, devout, very orthodox South Indian Vaishnava Brahmin, wrote and said he couldn't believe. He said, "Swamiji, getting this news?" And Swamiji wrote him back. He said, "Yes, it is true. Her name is Abhayananda, and she was a leader of the workers," as if that was somehow going to make it better for him. It's like, oh my God, a unionist too? But you see, once that gate was open, he fought like a demon to make sure that women had the right to take final monastic vows, to have that absolute freedom open for Westerners and for women. And so this day, when Swamiji said, "Sisters first, sisters and brothers of America," he opened that door for spiritual knowledge, not only for women, but for and to see this today, fantastic. Thank you all in the audience. Thank you to our astonishingly fantastic panel. Can't thank you enough for all putting your brains, your hearts, your minds into this beautiful work. And thank you all for joining us. And so I'll conclude with a chant. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Rama Krishna Arpanamastu. Thank you all very much.